In today's video, I survived 300 days in hardcore better Minecraft Plus. If you haven't seen the first 100 and 200 days yet, then I highly recommend you do go see those first because this series has been insane. From defeating dragons and devastating bosses to becoming so powerful that not even Mojang could stop me themselves. And today, I'm going even further beyond. So here I was on day 202 because I may have spent day 201 fighting a boss in the previous 100 days. Don't judge me. Anyways, the very first thing I did was begin putting together my brand new dragon bow because I'd ran out of time towards the end of the previous movie. I crafted myself the dragon bone bow, and apparently in this mod pack, I could not upgrade it into a fire dragon or ice dragon bow, which, not gonna lie, made me kinda sad. However, that was okay because with the mega OP enchantments I have already found, this thing is still going to be an absolute beast. So I rechecked all of my villagers and I organized my enchantments together before combining them all into one single book back at the XP farm, and then I added them to the bow for only a little over 50 levels, and I named this bad boy Hado99 Krushtiki after one of towards the end of the anime Bleach. Huge spoiler, I know. So now that my bow was done, I fast traveled back home so I could begin testing it out. Except for some strange reason, I couldn't shoot any arrows with it. So I had a different idea and I searched for arrows in the menu, and there they were. For dragon bones and withered bone tips, I could make myself dragon bone arrows. So I grabbed a stack of each kind of bones from my storage and I made a surprising amount of arrows. And now that I had the ammo for my brand new bow, I tested them out and this thing is insane. Hado99 was now an Unbreaking 3, Power 8, Punch 5 Mending bow. At this point, all I was missing was flame, and I was thinking about making it infinity in the future, but for now, I was ready AF to go back and conquer the Foundry, that highly dangerous dungeon from 200 days of better Minecraft. But before we enter that highly dangerous dungeon, how could we even stand a chance without today's sponsor, Apex Gaming? As you probably already know, I've partnered with Apex Gaming PCs to create 3 custom computers to help you all get straight into gaming without all of the hassle. Each of these PCs have NVIDIA graphics cards from the 1660 Super to the 3060 Ti and even the 3070, along with some beefy Ryzen CPUs that will allow you to take on any loads. From playing Minecraft on high settings with crazy FPS to even using shaders while recording your gameplay, each of these PCs are up to the task of making your gaming experience far better than ever before. So if you are interested, go down to the link in the description and don't forget to use code PAIN at checkout for an extra 5% off your order. Thank you everyone and Apex Gaming for this opportunity. Let's get back into the video. For day 203, after organizing my inventory in preparation for this giant hazardous dungeon, I teleported myself there and immediately dove in to begin clearing the hallways, and things were much different now. Both my bow and my sword were now capable of two-shotting all of those jerk piglin brutes that used to take so many hits to take down, and I was now on a roll, even though the chest loot was still pretty garbage. At this point, I had already cleaned out the first area by the villager halls by breaking 5 or 6 spawners, and all I had to show for it was a couple of bars of gold and iron. But that was okay because down below is where I must go. Why am I Dr. Seuss? So I continued my way through the halls and I passed the tier 5 dragon's nest, and things were already becoming more intense. Each set of piglins that had spawned in were no longer dying in 2 hits, but with my busted sword fusion flare, I had a massive chance to give them slowness 4, which pretty much numbered their days. Also, apparently I had spoken too soon because the first chest in this area had a beefy looking god apple inside. Don't ask me why I use the word beefy all the time. I wish I knew. Anyways, overall, I spent until the end of day 204 looting these top layers of the dungeon until I ran out of areas to go, but I did end up with a ton of useless spawners that, let's be honest, I will probably never use for any farms in the future. On day 205, now that I've cleared the upper floors and made my way back to the dragon's den in the center, it was finally time to go down below. Today, things were going to get real. and they got real quick. I climbed down the wall of the dragon's den, and before even getting down there, massive magma cubes and blazes began spawning. I jumped off the edge and I used my elytra to fly down, and there were spawners literally everywhere. I ran in to break the spawners in the center, and they began summoning these mobs called Foundry sentinels that were riding hoglins, and these dudes were pretty damn beefy. Once again, don't know why I keep using that word. I wrote it in my notes a million times. Don't judge me. However, I was a vegetarian and I'm not scared of him. Please somebody get that reference. So I barbecued his hoglin and I quickly struck him down before the pile of magma cubes in the room began playing ping pong with my body. And surprisingly, between all of the fire damage and the magma cubes, they actually managed to get me down by almost a row of my hearts, which technically isn't a lot since I have 3, but I do also have crazy armor, and that would almost be death without my extra rows. So you know what? This place was no joke. Anyways, fast forward ahead, after cleaning up most of the magma cubes, I went around breaking the remaining blaze and magma cube spawners on the sides near the lava, and I looted the chests, which actually had some kind of real loot now. I found a whole emerald block inside one of the chests, and I found this insane sounding item called the Forbidden Fruit that upon eating would take away my hunger forever at the sacrifice of 80% of any of my regeneration effects, which does not seem like a fair trade-off. For the next day, day 206, after cleaning out my inventory, I kept on exploring the new areas around this floor, and the loot took a full turn. After cleaning up the floor with so many magma cubes, I began finding diamonds and gold blocks inside of chests, along with netherite scraps and other random loot. I also started finding a lot more powerful spawners. I took on these much stronger wither skeletons that I wiped the floor with because I kept giving them slowness, and there was still so many magma cube spawners, and the big boys still managed to do some pretty good damage to me. However, after cleaning up this new area, I continued moving towards different parts of the dungeon, and the loot just kept coming and kept getting better and better. I was finding blocks of emerald, blocks of gold, gold bars, golden carrots, and withered tomes that gave me even more XP than regular tomes. And then I found this item that kind of blew my mind. Inside of one of these chests, I found this Keystone of Oblivion that has different modes that do different things with your inventory. Apparently, it's really hard to explain, but it sounds super helpful if I could figure it out. And if you're interested in what it does, pause the video here to read through this whole wall of text just describing this thing. It sounds nutty. So after looting the Keystone of Oblivion, I kept moving on further through this place, and it was beginning to feel like it would never end, along with all of the loot, because the next couple of chests that I looted had even more stonks inside. There was a whole bunch more diamond blocks, diamonds, along with nether scraps, a netherite bar, and my first arcane scroll, whatever those did. But hey, I did end up getting an achievement for it, and I like achievements. On day 207, I had finally finished all of the lower level of the Foundry, except for the very center where there was a small stage-like arena with a whole bunch more blaze spawners. I started off by breaking the center spawners that were hanging from the ceilings, and I was trying to loot the chests, and that's when the apparent hidden spawners began spawning in mutant blazes. And these guys may not have done a ton of damage, but boy were they scary. They sucked you in like a cyclone and began throwing me around like Midoriya from My Hero. I ended up landing in lava a couple of times, but thanks to my trusty bucket of unspecified liquid, let's just call it water, I barely had to deal with the lava. And after hitting them with a couple of swings, I was able to take down the first mutant blaze and then the second one, and each of them dropped me a mutant blaze core, which I didn't really know what they were for, but since they gave me an epic achievement, they must have been important. Anyways, after going around and stealing parts of those defeated mutant blazes, I began looking for the exit area near the dragon's den that I used to get in here. However, instead of finding that exit, I was distracted by this entrance to yet another dungeon that was floating up by the ceiling. And this place was a pretty good source of even more loot. And if you've been around the channel for a while, you know I like loot. There were more spawners everywhere with wither skeletons and these high pixel looking enemies that lit me on fire, and pretty much every set of chests had diamonds and golden apples inside. I kept running through each hallway while cleaning out the spawners and chests until I found what would have been this huge room if it wasn't stuck in the center of another huge underground lava cave that had tons more exposed arcane crystal ores. So I grabbed myself a waystone out of my shulker and I placed it down so I could come back here in the future to go and collect all of the loot that this place had to offer. And after this, I finished cleaning up the remaining parts of this much smaller dungeon, and somehow I ended up back at the first lava cave near where I had taken down that grand step dragon. So I used my fireworks to fly back to the center water source, and I swam up and used the waystone that I had placed back in 200 Days of Better Minecraft to finally go home a champion, because I had now successfully cleared out the entire Foundry dungeon, and it was now the end of day 209. For day 210, I kind of just stayed home organizing all of the loot that I had pulled from that grade A trip to the Foundry. I picked out tons of ores that I could break with Fortune 3, and I smelted all of the gold ores that I had gotten from each of the chests. By the time it was nighttime, I had all of the pure resources organized into my inventory, and I had come back with 1 netherite ingot and 22 scraps, 4 emerald blocks and 2 emeralds, 19 blocks of diamond and 2 extra, 39 gold blocks and 9 blocks of iron, not to forget the loads of other random loot that I had stuffed into all of my shulker boxes, including the ridiculous amount of spawners that I really don't need, and I don't know why I took them. I mean, minus the blaze spawners, that is. Anyways, while I was organizing all of this loot, I was shot by what I thought was a random skeleton, but no. It was your friendly neighborhood mutant skeleton. Joke's on him though, because my bow was now much more powerful than his. I quickly struck him down before I heard a nearby lightning strike that I was terrified had hit the roof of my building. So I flew down to the snowy field nearby to find out exactly why so many strikes of lightning hit during the nighttime. And that's when I found out that each of these lightning strikes spawned in super armored mobs with enchanted weapons and pickaxes. I sat here beating up the zombie until he finally went down, and he dropped me his disappointing pickaxe and chest piece. And while I was checking out this disappointing armor, another special mob spawned in and started shooting me in the back, so I had to quickly promote him to the best position at my local Wendy's. Dead. Anyways, I spent the rest of this day moving all of that loot that I was sorting into my storage system so I could keep my ender chest nice and clean, just like Father Vsauce. Why did I write that? Anyways, on to day 211. After finishing cleaning up my inventory, I looked up what a mutant blaze rod core did and what they were for, and they're so stupid, but I love it. Every time I right-click this bad boy, it yeets everything around me. Also, thank you to these villagers that totally loved being yeeted around. And before you say in the comments, there's no reason to be worried about them here. Trust me, they love it. So now that I knew what the blaze cores did, I went back home and I immediately threw them into my storage because they're low-key useless and not worth the effort that it took to get them at all. Also, while I was here, I noticed that a lot of my armor and my pickaxe were getting pretty worn down, so I went back to the XP grinder, where I waited for a couple of minutes, and I whipped out good old Simp Slayer to grind some mad XP, which quickly mended everything that I had and brought me over level 100. Not to mention, I also got a whole bunch more Wither Skulls and stacks of emeralds. So this day may not have been super crazy, but it was pretty productive. For day 212, I had a couple of things that I wanted to do before going back out on our next trip. I spent a lot of this day out gathering flowers in the rain that I could use for different dyes so I could finally color all of the shulkers in my ender chest because they had been driving me crazy for so long. I was out exploring the forest past the edge of the snow biome I lived in while gathering different flowers until I saw the side of this mountain that had so much exposed coal that I could not resist. So I kind of just sat here with my Fortune 3 pickaxe, mining everything the slow way. And before I knew it, the snowstorm had gotten really bad, and apparently it had already become nighttime. So as the sky demons began attacking me, because apparently I haven't slept in a while, I flew back home where I dumped my pretty juicy amount of coal into my storage system before I would spend the rest of the night making different dyes to color each of my shulkers. And after I had all the dyes I needed, I crafted each one and I organized them all perfectly into my ender chest with one extra slot left. But then I noticed something over in my search bar, a mutant shulker box, which made me think, now that we were in Better Minecraft Plus, the end must have so much more loot, plus I could now steal the shulker spawners for my own mutant shulker farm. However, I didn't stop there. While in the menu, I also learned of these things called advanced shulker boxes, which I thought would have even more storage. So I tried crafting one, and it turns out they're pretty much the exact same, except you don't have to place them to open them. So now that my entire ender chest was done, technically if I wanted to use these, I would have to remake them all. However, not now because I wanted to go back to the end to begin checking out all that it had for me to loot. So on day 213, as I was preparing to go to the end, I had realized that my food situation was not that great because I may have accidentally broken those cow spawners from the previous 100 days. However, all was good because I had the power of villagers. So I fast traveled over to this new town that I had recently discovered, and I found the first poor jobless, lucky friend that I could capture. And now that I had my friend, I went back home and I built a new addition to the villager stalls downstairs where I re-rolled this guy with a composter until I could actually level him up. And this guy had some cool new foods like cherry pie, mulberry, and passion fruit. And then after maxing him out, I could now buy more golden carrots in mass. And while I was at it, I also decided to stock up on more fireworks for my villagers, even though I could still come back here at any point by using a waste zone instead of the end. But you know what? You can never have too much loot and you can never be too careful. Anyways, while trading, I was trying to get my farmer to refresh more, but he was now being very stubborn. So you know what that meant? It meant it was time to go back to the village and borrow somebody else so I could speed up the process twice as much. And after borrowing this villager, I threw him into another stall until he had another easy trade to level him up. And this dude was way better than the first guy. He also had apples that I could use to craft golden apples, or I could use to feed lizards. Yes, I've not forgotten about the lizards. And he also had strawberry scones and cake, as if I was ever going to use them. But either way, I now had 2 golden carrot traders, and my food situation was pretty much solved. So now that I was fully prepared on the beginning of day 214, I teleported to the end waystone from the first 100 days, where I was ambushed by yet another mimic. However, this time things were a lot different. I was a new man with new armor. So even though the mimic stole my gorgeous look, I was still able to strike him down in 3 meager hits with fusion flare. And now that jerk was taken care of, I waited for the 4 times slowness that he had given me to wear away, and wow. I now know how the mobs that I attack feel when I give them slowness. And that will still probably not stop me from doing it. Probably not. So after I waited for my slowness to disappear, I took off with my elytra and fireworks so I could see what this new end had to offer. And besides some of the newer mods, I recognized most of the terrain from back when I lived 100 days in the modded end. Right before my old computer fried, that is. 07's in the chat for my original hardcore world. You will be missed. But with those sad thoughts aside, I pushed along until I found what looked like a purple dungeon on the map. I flew over to it and I landed on the roof because I knew exactly what this place was, and it was full of mad stonks. I broke through the ceiling and I began looting chests that at first didn't really have anything special. That is, until I found this room that had a ton. There were enchanted diamond tools and armor. There was a spell stone that was kind of difficult to read because the UI bugged out. And most importantly, I had found 2 of the resources that I was really hoping to find in the end, so I could make this tool called an astral breaker that breaks a 3x3x1 area, and these astral dust and ethereum ores were exactly the things I needed to make this bad boy. Also, this is future Pain talking here. I never made this thing. And if I did make it, I don't think I ever used it. I was here for no reason. Anyways, I spent the rest of this day wandering around this place more while taking out some of the things from Mario, and there wasn't really much more loot to be had, so after finishing up the dungeon, I went outside to actually touch grass for once in a while, and while I was at it, I crushed some endermen to see just how many pearls they would drop. And boy, these guys were like broken gumball machines. The looting on my weapon is insane. After setting back off to explore on day 215, the first thing I stumbled into was a tiny little tower that I didn't think was much. However, it turned out to be like a miniature city. I broke into the top room, and the very first thing I was greeted with was one of those rooms with a shulker spawner and 4 colored shulker boxes inside. So like the mana culture that I am, I tried breaking the spawner for the future shulker farm that I wanted to make, and just like that, I had gotten myself my very first shulker spawner, which, to be honest, isn't as useful as it sounds, but you know what, whatever. Shortly after this, I fought this beefy looking shulker that had spawned in a heated 1v1 battle to the death, and after he was down and out, I went around yoinking all 4 of those free shulkers because, hey, it's free real estate. So now that I had more loot, I jumped down to the bottom room where I was ganged up upon by a pile of mimics and more shulkers that kept shooting me and levitating me. And honestly, this was just awful. Every time I hit a mimic, they gave me more slowness 4, which destroys my FOV, and the shulkers would not stop attacking me until they were finally all gone. And I ended up with a shulker spawn egg from this. So in a way, it kind of worked. I got myself a new pet, and I ended up with 3 more shulker shells and another mimic cream, whatever those are for. For the next 3 days, days 216 through 218, I spent way too much time flying through random biomes before actually finding something crazy. And for some reason, I was thinking there was going to be much more to do in the end, but finally, after day 218, I had found my first real end city of this trip, assuming that that tiny one didn't count. And this place had an actual end ship. After landing, I quickly blew through the different rooms in the end city, and I of course stole myself yet another shulker spawner and 4 more brand new shulkers. And after that, there wasn't really much left to look around at while in the city, so it was now time to take on the end ship. And this place had about the same amount of enemies and loot as the first one where I'd gotten my first elytra from. However, there was a lot more mimics that I now easily eviscerated with my massive brain and sword. And of course, after finishing off all the enemies, I borrowed the elytra and all of that loot that I just mentioned from down below the ship's deck, which was pretty much the same as the last one. On day 219, after finishing looting the first end city, I set back out in search for more better places to loot, because not gonna lie, I was becoming very bored of the end dimension. I began flying while my game was having a moment with all of the lag, and the first thing I came across was one of those tall towers with a free waystone and a chest at the top. So I landed up top so I could steal both, and huge surprise, the chest had pretty much nothing inside, but that was okay because after checking my map once again, I noticed another one of those purple dungeons a little bit past the end city that I had just looted. I grabbed my fireworks and I flew all the way there, and this place ended up being full of more loot. The first chest room I found had iron, gold, diamonds, diamond armor, and other random loot, including a dragon scale, which I'm pretty sure is super important in this mod pack. I kept exploring the place until I stumbled upon the next room, and there were so many more diamonds and gold in here, along with another dragon scale, along with these things called Munda Batir dust, which I had no clue what to do with, but they also seemed important. They're also really weirdly named. Anyways, I continued looking around this place until I had exhausted the rest of my loot, and I set back out in search for more places to borrow all kinds of things from. However, at this point, the end no longer wanted to be my friend, and I had conveniently found another tower with a waypoint. So I named it something like End Last Waypoint in case I wanted to come back here in the future, which I probably don't, and I teleported back to my domain so I could begin counting all of my loot. And overall, I was in the end until the end of day 222. For day 223, now that I was home, I laid out all of the shulkers of loot that I had gotten, and I began disenchanting most of the diamond enchanted loot for XP for some weird reason. I have no clue why I did this. In comparison to using my XP farm, you know what, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I did it, that's all that matters. Honestly, I'm not sure why I even took it with me, doesn't matter. After exposing of the diamond items, I gathered together my iron, gold, and diamonds, which ended up being a pretty good amount. However, I still needed more astral dust, because I only ended up with 1 of the 4 that I would need to make the hammer. And unfortunately, the only place where they spawn just so happened to be end cities, which for some reason are much less common in this world. So this meant that if I wanted to craft the thing still, I was going to have to go back to the end, which I was not about right now. So instead, I continued looking through the items I wanted to craft, and I was now able to make 2 brand new charms that were busted. I crafted this first one that gave me night vision and a 30% mining increase along with extra fortune, and I crafted the second one that gives me additional looting, monster damage, and supposedly double monster XP. And that's when my massive 5-head gamer brain kicked in. I teleported back to my XP farm, where I waited for a bit for mobs to spawn, so I could test out just how much more XP I could get with good old Simp Slayer. And within literal minutes, I was now over level 160. My XP situation just keeps becoming more and more busted. And that's when, on day 224, I had an even better idea. I was going to finally upgrade all of my tools for some mega enchanted bone tools, increase my tool belt storage massively, and create another Flame God sword with the enchantment for super XP. So maybe before these 100 days ended, I could hit level 1000, maybe, because I quickly found myself distracted by the next best thing. Since I had dragon eggs now, I could skip dragon bone tools and go straight to dragon steel, baby. So I grabbed the dragon eggs from my inventory and I began researching what to do to hatch dragons online, and I learned a lot. I first crafted myself a dragon staff using one of those dragon heads from my inventory so I could control whichever dragons I hatched once they grew up. And after that, I kind of began struggling for information online, so I thought, why not try the bestiary in-game? I placed down a lectern and I began plowing through all of the knowledge about dragons and pretty much anything else until I 100% completed the book. So now that I had a little more knowledge on dragons, I continued looking up what to do until I discovered how to make dragon meal to feed the dragon so they grow, and the dragon horn, which can be used to summon and desummon tamed dragons. I crafted myself the horn, and after that I crafted as much dragon meal as I could until I ran out of any beef, pork, or mutton. Which means while I was waiting for the dragons to hatch, I was going to have to go back out on an animal hunt. However, before that, I had a couple of options left. In order to hatch the lightning egg that I had, which would give me purple armor, I needed to place the egg out under the rain for several days. However, for the fire dragon, I needed to place him in fire, which to be honest was much quicker. Plus, I really wanted the fire tools instead of the lightning ones for obvious lightning striking reasons. I like arson as much as the next guy when it's not my house. Also, don't quote me on that. On day 225, I began by trying to finish cleaning out my shulkers from the end trips before beginning to hatch my dragons. And during this process, something good and bad happened. The good thing was I had found the missing astral dust that I had needed to craft that item, and the bad thing was that my storage system was now full. I guess that makes sense when you think about it, since the storage system was just a wall of chests, and after having all the raw resources shoved inside instead of blocks, they take up a lot more space. So to temporarily clean things up, I moved all of the diamond armor crap from my storage, and I began yeeting it off the edge of my house into a nice pile down below. My neighbors love me, trust me. After this, I began smelting the Ethereum that I had so I could quickly build the hammer until I learned that each of the 3 Ethereum tools required for it also needed 2 of the astral dust to craft. So even though I had enough for the hammer, I also didn't because I needed to make the tools first. So instead of wasting my time going back to the end looking for more of that stuff, which could probably take me the next 20 days, I instead decided to focus on the dragons, and I just kind of shoved everything back into storage for now. After this, I went to the nether and I grabbed some netherrack, and I made the pretty small brain decision to place this inside of my house where I had thought it was far enough away from the wood to not start a fire. And spoiler, I was very wrong. This dragon wasn't even born yet, and he had already almost burnt my house to a crisp. For day 226, after finding out how to make a dragon forge, I realized just how many resources I was truly going to need to make the dragon steel armor. In order to make a dragon forge, you need 1 aperture, 1 forge core, 17 fire steel blocks, and 8 dragon blown blocks. So I grabbed all of the fire dragon scales I had from my storage, and I crafted them into blocks before adding them with stone bricks to make dragon forge fire bricks. After this, I used the dragon heart and some iron to make both the aperture and the core, and now I had 4 more bricks out of the 17 that I was going to need, which, after doing the math, I had found out was going to require an additional 455 dragon scales to finish. So it was safe to say I was going to need more dragons along with tons of animals for the dragon meal to grow the baby dragons. Also, at this rate, there was basically no way I was going to get a purple forge going at the same time for that purple armor, so it looks like I was going to be stuck with the red armor after all. Especially since right after I finished crafting these, my first baby dragon had hatched, and she was adorable. I grabbed my horn, weird sentence, I know, and I linked it to the dragon so I could now carry her around and summon and desummon whenever I would need. So now that my dragon had hatched, I was in need of tons of food and tons of dragon scales to finish my project. I spent the rest of this day organizing my inventory so I could set back out on a massive expedition that I was going to need to get these ultimate tools, weapons, and armor. So on day 227, as I was preparing to set out, I noticed I had some quests that I could turn in, and that's when I realized there were even more bosses I could take on besides the Summoner. After defeating the first 2 bosses in the Everdawn and the Everbright dimensions, there were apparently 2 more, and not only that, there was also a boss called the Nether Monstrosity inside of the Nether. So I collected all of the rewards for what quests I had finished, and I was given a blaze flamethrower that looked insanely cool. But I was going to have to leave those distractions back here for now, because today I began my food and dragon hunts. I first fast traveled to the newest waystone that I had in the world, where I had conveniently spawned in front of a dragon that was caught up fighting this whole Illager castle. And this guy was not winning by far, because after only hitting him with a couple of arrows, he was down and out. And after flying over to loot his body, this place was a mess. His body was stuck inside the blocks, and there were drops everywhere. Not to mention the annoying illusioners that kept giving me blindness and slowness 4, which destroys my FOV. Overall, I struggled to get this dragon's drops, and I found myself clearing out a ton of these guys before I could even get the items out of my inventory to collect the drops off the ground. By the time I had everything in my inventory, it was now nighttime. So I landed on the ground near the dragon's nest to quickly clean out my inventory before sleeping, and that whole process only netted me a meager 5 dragon skills. Getting this armor was going to be a grind. On the morning of day 228, I picked up my bed and I began looking around this weird valley that I was in. This whole place was a massive chunk error with super cut off cliffs, and I looked up to the side of one of those cliffs only to see an identical building to my base just kind of hanging out there. So before leaving, I decided, why not check it out to see if any of the villagers had any good trades. And none of these villagers were even worth mentioning, so because they had nothing of value, I kept moving on. And let me tell you, today was going to be a dragon full day. After only several hundred blocks, I ran into my first dragon fight where I tried sword-to-face combat and the odd chance that my enchantments would impact what he drops. And overall, this fight was honestly obnoxious. The dragon did nothing to me except waste my time. Once I finally killed him, I looted his body for a pretty decent 21 scales, although it seems like looting and other enchantments didn't really make much difference. After this, I continued on flying until I found a second dragon lair with a nearby dragon that was 1v2ing a couple of drakes like the Call of Duty nerd that he was. I swooped in and I 2-shot him. I shot this guy 2 times and he died. This dragon was super easy. After the dragon was down, I took out the 2 drakes along with the poor defenseless and submissive cows that they were trying to eat before looting the dragon, who gave me a whopping 0 scales. This was a literal scam dragon. 0 out of 5 stars on Fiverr. Anyways, after taking out the second guy, I kept moving on where I borrowed a couple more waystones along the way from different towers until I had ran into yet another Barako the Sun Chief village. I spent the rest of this night running around and farming all the small enemies for easy free masks, and then I began tanking Barako on himself, and I did so much damage. I began smacking with my sword until he shot his massive ray of light at me that I blocked entirely with my shield before shooting this dude in the face a few more times, where I banished him to the Shadow Realm. And now that I had added all of their faces to my collection, I placed out my bed and I slept the night away. On the next day, day 229, I was out minding my business inside of the new village that I found, borrowing all of their cows for dragon food, until I witnessed this battle of the Titans. There was a bronze dragon 1v1ing an Ampere right in the middle of the town. And at this point, they were both so weak that I hit them each with 1,000 years of death before stealing all of their loot. And again, that didn't end up being that much. These dragons were holding out on me. So after cleaning out my inventory once again, I continued exploring for the day, where I found a ton. I first ran into this large mushroom house with piglin brutes inside, and they didn't really have much loot. After this, I stole the waystone off 2 of the nearby towers, including some more pretty subpar loot. And then finally, to finish off this day, I had found one of the most insane structures in all of Better Minecraft that I have only found in the worlds that I use to make thumbnails. That is, until now. I flew up into this massive airship with crazy spawners and enemies inside. I began checking each chest I could find, but for some reason, they didn't really have any loot. That is, until I made my way into the center of the place, where there were a ton of wither skeletons and gross, icky spiders along with lots of other random mobs. I took out as many as I could until my inventory filled up, so I placed down a waystone so I could come back here, and I went home for the night to clean out all of the new loot that I had acquired. For day 230, after teleporting back, I began running through each area in the ship, wiping the floor with any mobs while also lighting up the area with torches, because honestly I was kind of thinking about living here. I mean, maybe. I feel like I always say this because of how picky I am, and then I never actually do. Anyways though, after finishing up the whole ship and exploring the top area, I moved on to a nearby village where I found my next dragon target, and again, for some reason, he died from only a couple of bow shots. Maybe I was becoming the monster that I had set out to slay myself. This brand new bow was an absolute monster. After looting this dragon, he dropped me another 12 scales, and by the end of this day, I was now up to a total of 63 scales, which were definitely rookie numbers, but if you think about it, out of the 400 I needed, I was kind of doing pretty good. However, pretty good is not good enough for me, so for the next 6 days straight, I continued my ultimate dragon hunting adventure, where I continued on 5-shotting dragons with my god bow. On day 231, I first took down an ice dragon, which isn't very useful for the firestone bricks, but he did drop me a whopping 32 scales. After this, I found a bronze dragon that after only 5 more shots, dropped me 28 more scales. I ended off this day by taking out this fine red fire dragon who dropped me an additional 33 more red scales. And all of a sudden, dragons were actually starting to cooperate with me. For the next set of days, days 232 through 234, I started off my hunt with this first bronze dragon that really wanted to burn me while lagging my game. However, after making him eat his own words, I was now up 31 more bronze skills in my inventory. Joke was on him. L plus ratio dragon. After that, I found my game coming to a complete halt where I tried to take on this ice dragon. However, after the game snapped back to reality, just like Eminem said, I also took this dragon out to dinner, and they gifted me a free 17 blue scales in my honor. What a gentleman. I kept hunting dragons at this pace, while for some reason dealing with constant game crashes and lag inside of the ice biomes, until the end of day 236, where I totaled out enough dragon scales to get me up to a total of 12 Dragon Forge Fire bricks, which meant I now only needed 5 more blocks, which unfortunately meant I now needed enough to craft the 4 bricks 2 more times, which was still about 90 more dragon skills. But anyways, during the last day of hunting, I had ran into this crazy looking dragon type that I've never seen before. And honestly, this guy made it legit very difficult to see anything on my screen. And after killing it, it turned out to be from the Worm Roost mod that I didn't even know was inside this mod pack. In between all the dragon fights during these days, I also found a whole bunch of chimpanzees that I of course had to capture, and I took out another Barako the Sun Chief, only to finally find a Savannah cockatrice. And not just one, there were tons of them. If you've seen the first 2 videos, you'd know my struggles with these stupid animals. Honestly, it's sadly ironic. For day 237, after stopping back in my base, I decided to take a quick trip back to the XP farm so I could repair my armor, and after only a couple of minutes of borrowing their XP, my armor was back to new, and I left off on the perfect number like the absolute gamer of culture that I am. And speaking of culture, if you've gotten this far in the video so far, and you are not subscribed, I honestly don't know what you're doing with your life. Here, I'll make the screen black just so you can look at yourself in the mirror and think about it for a little bit. Think about why you've not subscribed yet. But for real, if you do enjoy this video, I make lots others like it, including my other hardcore series, and it would mean a lot to me if you did subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave a like on the video, because that really helps me in the algorithm as well. If we can hit 30,000 likes on this video, I'd be a pretty happy guy. Anyways, now that shameless plug and my armor repair were over, I looked at the map for a new direction to travel and hunt for more dragons. And I set off south of my house, and not long after flying over all of the betas below me, I found my first dragon nest of the day, which consisted of this bronze dragon that didn't really care to guard his treasure very much. I hit him with the old razzle dazzle, and this man was down in an instant. What an easy way to get 15 free bronze scales. After this, I set back out and searched for more dragons, but instead, all I found before this day ended was another mini pillager castle where I stole some basic loot from the attic and a small village with more wyverns just hanging around waiting for me to steal their meat. Winky face. Why did I say winky face? Anyways, it was now sundown, and I casually stole this villager's bed as he went out for a late night trip to get milk, where he probably wouldn't return, just like Dad. For the next 3 days, days 238 through 240, I set out in search for more dragons, and these days were anything but lucky. Most of the time, I found myself flying over ocean after ocean after ocean after ocean that were full of pirate ships and non-grass touching fish. That is, until I ran into another good old friend, this super laggy bronze dragon that I very quickly made easy work of, and I stole his skin, which now put me up to 35 bronze scales, 1/3 of the way to the 90 that I needed. After killing that abomination, I continued on my landless journey until I noticed this peculiar looking structure underwater. So I decided to land on a nearby pink sand beach so I could check it out, and I found myself surrounded by these masked dudes right after I got the achievement Renai Circulation, which is a really weird name. I swam back up to see just what I had gotten myself into, and it was a plague asylum, apparently. And I'm guessing this place was going to be just as rough as the Foundry, the massive underground dungeon that I had conquered earlier. I mean, after all, this place was just as laggy. So I began preparing myself for this most likely torment. I'm not a masochist, I swear. I placed down a waystone that I named after the asylum, and I made my way over to the nearby giant to take him out, just in case he got any ideas about snacking on my gamer cheeks. I took one shot, and he disappeared. Apparently I can one-shot giants now. After this, I jumped into the water to grab his eye, and shortly after, I was jumped by a sea serpent. Short story, even shorter, my giant eye was on sale. It was buy one, get 3 serpent scales free. After taking my new friends out to dinner where I left them to pay, I fast traveled back home to clean out my inventory and make more dragon arrows before going to sleep for the night. On day 241, now fully prepared, I went back to the asylum waypoint where I began my journey into what I thought was going to be a very interesting and dangerous place. However, instead, it turns out the water had ruined everything. Every single inch of this place was covered in sources of water that were beyond noisy and very laggy. But even with all of that, I still kept pushing forward. There weren't many enemies around because, you know, all of the wet. But while down here, I did manage to collect a whole pile of witch and wither skeleton spawners, along with a good amount of gold, some diamonds, and crazy potions from a bunch of different chests, including these insane Bad Omen 5 potions, which would make for some really fun future raiding. But for now, I was done with this place. There was no challenge, minimal loot and things to kill, and lag. Lots and lots of lag. So I kind of just left, and honestly, I will probably never come back. 1 star on Yelp. For day 242, things were very different. I had been away from this world for several weeks because I was moving in real life, and now my setup was entirely different. But nonetheless, I still remembered what I had to do inside of this world. I was hunting for more dragons. So I checked my map to see any directions that I haven't been in yet, and I set off to the west in search of more of those beautiful beasts to slay. But before finding any dragons, I first ran into this exotic looking building that was full of more cow people. Why does it sound so weird calling them that? I landed nearby trying to see how many spawners were inside, and upon looking into the sky, I noticed another one of those god tier ships floating above. So I grabbed myself some torches to begin lighting up the inside of the building, and I began my push through. Overall, there was only a few spawners, and not many of the enemies really did much to me. Basically, while I was here, I Control-Alt-Deleted each and every one of those great value techno blades before looting each of the barrels and chests. And things were pretty cheap, minus the random supplies that could help me go to the end, if I hadn't already done that. But anyways, now that this place was done, I made my way up to the ship above, where I landed down inside, and I began obelisk obliterating anything that dared move in my way. And at first, the loot here was garbage just like the place before, but after a couple of chests, I felt like they were trying to bribe me because I kept finding both netherite and more netherite scraps. However, that was not enough. So after cleaning out the whole inside, I broke some of their windows like any civilized neighbor would do, and I landed on a nearby island in the sky where I spent my night dumping my inventory into shulkers before continuing my hunt for more dragons. On day 243, after setting off from that disturbingly slimy island, I dropped down into the ocean to yoink some beautiful gold blocks from this portal, only for me to be jumped by this massive Leviathan. But no matter how much damage he did to me, I had God and anime on my side, so I quickly knocked him out of my domain. This ocean was now mine. But not for long, because I was out and about looking for more dragons to lead to their demise. Except in proper PainDomination fashion, I was very quickly distracted over and over. I first ran into this village with yet another Sun Chief that had an army of healers that constantly stopped me from taking him down. In fact, this fight was so absurd that a random sea serpent took advantage of the chaos by trying to body slam me like a Snorlax. But long story short, both Snorlax and the Sun Chief were telling Iron Man that they didn't feel so good after I was done with them. And after all of that chaos, I decided to check on a couple of nearby ships in the ocean for their kills and loot, and I landed on Rapunzel's tower here with a free real estate waystone that I used to drop my things off back at my base, and I slept away the night. For day 244, I teleported back to the tower to continue my search, and after checking the map, I had found two beautiful things. I first headed over to this dragon's nest, where I 1v1 this very handsome lightning dragon in a game of search and destroy, and this dude was terrible. I ninja defused the bomb, took him to the cleaners before collecting his whopping 35 dark blue scales. After taking his skin for myself, I moved on to yet another one of those giant colorful sand places where I spent until the end of day 245 looting some of the best loot rooms this place had to offer. I walked away with stacks on stacks of diamonds, gold, emerald blocks, along with some more easy spawners. However, after looting the best loot here, I decided I was done for now because the making of OP dragon armor was the only thing that I had on my mind. On day 246, before setting back out for hunting dragons, I decided to take a quick break from this hunt to sit back at my XP farm, where I grinded myself above level 200, and I repaired my nearly broken pickaxe, and overall, today was just kind of a pretty chill day. I had a lot of damage on my armor from all the dragon fights, and I decided that, I should sit here, have a little spa day, and prepare myself for more of the chaos that was soon to come. And boy, was there chaos. Because for the next 6 days straight, until day 253, I was out striking down dragons left and right. I first started off my rampage by memeing on the small-brained black dragon, by deleting it from existence with a mere couple of shots from my godlike bow. And this guy dropped me 25 black dragon scales, which weren't that useful for what I needed, but hey, after a fight as easy as that, I couldn't really say no. Anyways, shortly after that fight, I found and adopted this brand new emu friend that I was going to name Kevin. After getting my new friend Kevin, I then hunted down this gray fire dragon, where I also destroyed him with a couple of bow shots. And honestly, these dragon fights were becoming easier and easier by the day. Wow, there's probably an innuendo hidden in there. Throughout these days, I hunted down dragon after dragon after dragon while collecting the scales from each and every one. However, that was not all. During some of these days, I also got into a 3v1 fight with a sea serpent and 2 more Leviathans. I started an all-out war with a monkey tribe from the village hidden in the jungle, and I found these adorable seals that I adopted to become part of the Domination Nation. Kind of like what you should do by subscribing to the channel. Ooh, I am so sorry you had to hear that. So by the time it was the end of day 253, I was now up tremendously. I had now gotten 54 red dragon scales, 25 black dragon scales, 18 gray scales, 21 bronze scales, 25 white scales, 10 emerald scales, 31 silver scales, 12 light blue scales, and loads of other dragon and sea serpent loot. I was another few steps closer to my completely busted armor. And overall, I was thrilled that I was pretty much done fighting dragons because they took forever to find. So on day 254, after returning home, I gathered all of the spoils from war and I began crafting them into blocks so I could make the remaining forge blocks that I was missing to build my forge. I made my way over to the small hill near my house and I cleared out some dirt so I could finally build my brand new dragon forge. And after building it, I had realized something. There were 2 things that I needed now before I could truly begin making these weapons and armor. I now needed to become Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon and raise myself a dragon, and I needed to hunt even more dragons for their dragon's breath because I needed that to put inside of the forge and turn iron into dragon steel. So after fighting all of those dragons and thinking that I was done with it, I was not. I ended up having so much more to do. So after building the forge, I used my dragon horn to summon my handsome little dragon dude here, and I began feeding her to make her big and healthy. And this little dude repaid me by immediately working on the forge to make my very first ingot of dragon steel. And I kid you not, this dude immediately started acting up and tried to destroy my house right after. This dude was unhinged and she needed to be fed. So on day 255, I was back out, except this time in search for different animals to feed my new dragon. I started out by stopping by nearby villages, where instead of doing the smart thing and collecting the cows to be bred, I instead killed them in cold blood, which I would soon learn was a huge mistake because throughout the rest of this day, there were no more animals. I kept flying everywhere, and all I found was a couple of ships full of pillagers in the ocean with some pretty mediocre loot and just empty fields with no animals. I pretty much spent this entire day flying over land and then ocean where I couldn't find any more land, and I ended up killing a couple of sirens, and I even defeated this sea serpent with my own bare hands. And overall, it was pretty unsuccessful day. It was a rough day. At this point, it had become nighttime, so I placed my bed nearby and I slept away the spooky, scary night. Today was about as bad as the notes that I wrote for today. On day 256, after waking up, the very first thing I did was set back out in search for more animals. That is, until I instead became extremely distracted with these pirate ships full of skeletons and pillagers. And ironically, they had chests full of the very things I was searching for. I found pork chops, raw mutton, raw beef, all perfect to be turned into more dragon feed. Anyways, after raiding these ships, I continued on my mini journey for food, where I found this giant just munching on these villagers, and I was going to take him down, but I had just freshly ran out of arrows, which was kind of awkward, but I did make do with what I had by taking just a couple of his sheep nearby while he was distracted, and after that I borrowed one of the villagers' houses so I could sleep the night away. For the next day, day 257, after setting off from that nice gatekeeper's house, I was still looking for cows and sheep, and instead I found these gorgeous dragon-looking dudes that I absolutely needed to adopt. I grabbed more of my magical cubes of stealing, and I yoinked each and every one of them before continuing on to find the perfect thing that I was looking for. While looking for more animals, I had stumbled upon another piglin village hidden in the fog, and this place had exactly what I was looking for, a cow spawner. I could finally use this to grind for more meat to feed my dragon. Weird sentence, I know. So after gathering the spawner, I used the waystone to teleport myself back home, where I spent the night farming these cows while being interrupted constantly by a mutant skeleton and this absolute chad of a mutant zombie that for some reason kept respawning, but invisible. So at this point I said screw it, and I retreated back to my base to sleep away my problems, just like in real life. Anyways, on day 258, I used my Silk Touch pick to gather a bunch of grass blocks that I could use to build a temporary place inside of my base to farm my newly acquired cow spawner. So this way they could continue to spawn while I was kind of just chilling around my base and actually accomplishing things instead of just AFKing. I placed all of the grass downstairs along with a set of fences around it, and I placed the spawner in the middle so these guys could begin spawning. And now that I had an abundance of food spawning in my base, I took all of the meat that I had gathered and I crafted about 40 plus dragon meal to feed my new dragon friend. However, my dragon had a much different idea than that, because I could not get her to stay still for anything. The dragon would not sit down, the dragon staff didn't work, and I even crafted a fire dragon crystal to try and force her to stay with no luck. This dragon just did not want to eat more to grow, apparently. Overall, I wasted this entire day trying to manage my dragon that just was not having any of it. I began day 259 by researching the Ice and Fire mod to find out what I actually needed. And after just a little bit of research, I found out about something called a dragon flute. With this bad boy, I could now supposedly ground my dragon just by blowing the flute. And finally, the dragon was kind of listening. And now this dude was finally ready to behave. I began stuffing as many dragon meal into her face as I could, and she grew to a massive size. By the time I was done feeding the dragon all of my bone meal, she was almost max level, and I could now ride the dragon. So now that my little dude was all grown up and ready to start blasting away at some steel, I was now in need of more dragon's blood. However, in order to get more dragon's blood, I was going to need more bottles. And with my luck, I had just ran out of glass. So I went back to the original Paintopia to gather myself some sand. I went back home, popped it into the furnace for glass, and while I was waiting for it to smelt, I grabbed some emeralds so I could do some classic capitalism with my end villager for more fireworks. Gotta fix inflation somehow. On day 260, now that I had the glass I needed, I crafted almost a stack of glass bottles, and I teleported back to my most recent waystones so I could go searching for, you guessed it, more dragons. I know, I've done nothing but kill dragons in this video. Anyways, after only a little bit of flying, I found this ice guy that I didn't really need because I was making fire dragon steel. But you know what? I can't resist a good fight, so I 1v1 this dragon into the ground, where at the very last second, I was grabbed and tossed around like some ragdoll by this Mike Tyson crocodile. Man, better Minecraft? Be scary. After defeating both the dragon and Mike Tyson, I decided to steal some ice blood anyways for a rainy day, and I was back on my journey for dragging these dragons. I was back searching for dragons. And boy, did this journey go super well. I first found one of those Blackstone-like dungeons that I couldn't really find the keymaster whatever to. I kept flying until I found a dragon's nest on the map, and the second I got near it, my game crashed. And if you've ever played better Minecraft before, you probably know that it does not load very fast. Even with the best PC in the world, this mod pack still takes forever to load sometimes because there are 300 plus mods. Today was not the best day, especially because while waiting for my game to reload, it crashed again. And after finally loading in again, I was finally able to take on the dragon, but only after this short Cyclops admission. Anyways, after taking the short Cyclops to dinner and turning the dragon into dessert, I ended up with 5 of the dragon's breath that I was going to need because each dragon caps at 5, which kind of sucks because that means I was going to need to take on so many more dragons just to get this armor after I had already taken on, you know what, you get it. I killed a lot of dragons to get this armor, and I'm still not there. So after taking down and looting that dragon, I spent the next 2 days, days 261 through 262, out exploring for yet more dragons. While flying around looking for more dragon's nests, I kept running into those mini towers with free real estate gold blocks and waystones on the roof. And I hit the jackpot with another hidden mushroom village, complete with another cow piglin spawner that I could add to my collection to make a steak farm for more dragon food. At this rate, by the end of these 300 days, I could have a dragon army. I continued exploring further, and I ran into multiple more of those towers that I yoinked the same waystones from, and I even got a third cow spawner from yet another mushroom village that was surprisingly becoming pretty common now. To end off these 2 days, I finally found another fire dragon that I very easily took down. However, he was hanging out with the wrong crowd because nearby there was a Hydra, and I really wanted to kill this Hydra because they dropped something called a Hydra's Heart that gives you regeneration when you put it in your hotbar. Except this guy was in his prime habitat. He was just swimming around in the shallow, warm ocean with his rapid fire poison, so I could barely get close to him. Arrows didn't really do much because he needed consistent damage to actually die, and since he kept camping in the water, he was basically untouchable. However, I was not about to quit here, so I placed down one of my waystones and I teleported back home for the night to prepare for the absolute clowning that this man was about to receive. After getting home, I crafted several more stacks of dragonbone arrows, and I placed the other 2 cow spawners in the grass pen downstairs to speed up the temporary farm spawns for that sweet meat. Wow, that sounds wrong. For day 263, now that I was fully prepared, I teleported back to the Hydra, and I began using my bow's insane knockback to slowly push this dork onto dry land. And that's when I went in for the kill. I used my Elytra to swoop in, and after only a few smacks with my god sword, the Hydra was no more, and he had dropped 2 of his legendary items that gave me free regen whenever I had them in my hotbar. At this point, there was no man or beast left that could oppose me. I was becoming cracked plus ultra. This world was going to know pain. So now that my arch nemesis, the Hydra, had been defeated, I spent the rest of this day on an absolute rampage. I found and defeated another dragon that gave me 5 more dragon's blood. I found another mushroom village, and this one had an insane 3 more cow spawners. I could now make a cow tower, also known as a cower. Anyways, after the sun had gone down, I found myself testing out my might by beating up all of these diamond zombies and skeletons, and they were dropping loot like piñatas. After cleaning out this base and stealing their loot, I found myself finishing off the night by protecting and accidentally killing all of the villagers in this nearby village when trying to fight off this named zombie. And unfortunately, there was no survivors. And it definitely was not my fault, no comment. Anyways, on day 264, things started going pretty great. I placed down more of my spawners and I harvested enough cows to make a ton more dragon meal for my dragon. And after that, I went outside to my forge and I began putting her to work, and this is where things went wrong. This dragon kept leaving her post at the forge and trying to destroy my house. I kept using my flute to ground her until finally tragedy had struck. This dude rammed my house and set everything on fire. I tried so hard to stop myself from losing everything, and after a solid 5 to 10 minutes of struggling, the fire was finally under control. I technically saved my house, minus this entire corner, but at least all of my villagers and all of my loot were still safe. But honestly, at this point, I was really regretting placing this thing that close to my house. Literally, why don't dragons behave? And also, why did I continue to take this risk? Honestly, I was more disappointed in myself than I was in the dragon at this point. And now, technically, I needed a new place to call home. Although, realistically, I was probably not going to move. So, in true disappointed fashion, I went to sleep for the night. On the morning of the next day, day 265, I flew down to the forge to assess, everything. My house now had a massive crater in the side of it, and on top of that, the dragon barely even cooked any of the steel. And the poop icing on top of the poop icing cake, I was now going to need 30 more dragon's blood to make enough steel for all of the armor and weapons that I was going to need. And once again, I was in need of hunting more dragons. But first, I was back to feeding my jerk of a dragon. So this time, I fast traveled back to Paintopia, and I fully leveled her up to 500 health. And now, she was a level 5 Giga Chad Super RGB Gaming Dragon. And she was huge. So I got myself a name tag, and I rightfully named her Giga Dragon. And now it was almost time to go back out hunting more dragons. But first, I had one more thing that I've been putting off forever now. I went back home, and I crafted as many pouches as I could for my tool belt. So this way, I could now store more things inside of my tool belt instead of my inventory, which would make it a little bit less of a struggle. And this thing was now maxed out with 8 slots. I was now ready to hunt more dragons, which at this point is kind of becoming half of the video. So for day 266, now that I was once again prepared to hunt dragons, big surprise, I fast traveled back to my newest waystone to begin the fight of my life, killing as many fire dragons as possible. However, the game had a very different plan, because instead I found this area full of ice dragons. I kid you not. Back to back to back ice dragons. I ended up killing 6 of these dragons in a span of about 10 minutes. That's right, 6 dragons in one day. If these were fire dragons, would have been perfect. I would have been set, had enough dragon's blood for the rest of the video. But instead, here I was dumping all of my items into a shulker and continuing my journey after sleeping in this dead dragon's lair while also being jump scared by a creeper. Anyways, it was now day 267 and my mission was still going strong. After flying for only a few minutes, I had already found and slain 2 different dragons, and the second one dropped me a red dragon spawn egg. The enchantment on my sword gave me a buy one get one free deal on dragons. After collecting my free Dragonade, I continued slaying more dragons through day 270, and my game was becoming more and more laggy the further I traveled until I literally fell through the map and crashed. I don't have the footage because the game crashed, but I was terrified that I had lost everything to a dumb glitch. By the time I was back home the next day, I had only gotten 15 more Dragon's Blood, which was half of what I had needed. For day 271, today was the day that I was going to move the forge over to Paintopia because my house could not take any more beatings. I flew down to the forge and I began breaking all of the blocks, and after collecting them all, I teleported back over to Paintopia and I rebuilt everything just far enough away from the village to kind of mitigate the damage. Future pain foreshadowing, this did not help because this man immediately crushed a house right after I summoned her. But I mean, at the end of the day, the house wasn't technically my problem because he wasn't a part of my insurance policy. Anyways, after finally getting the dragon settled once again, she was going ham on the forge for most of this day, and by the time the sun started to get low, she had already cooked me 10 more ingots. But once again, she was back on a rampage. I spent the last few minutes fighting for her to get working again, and she decided, nah fam, I'm just gonna sleep instead, because it was now night. So I had no choice but to desummon her and go back home to sleep the night away as well. For day 272, it was back to babysitting the dragon. I went back to Paintopia for her to continue cooking dragon steel, and of course she was extremely difficult about it as she fought me every step of the way, until finally, after a long time coming, we had cooked all 23 of the new dragon steel. And after combining it with what I had in my shulker, I now had 31, which was definitely enough for what I needed. Now it was time to build myself some new gear. I teleported back home, and one by one, I crafted each piece of armor, followed by a new sword and a new pickaxe. And just for a quick example of how much more damage this sword is going to do, the base damage is 25. In comparison to my old sword, that was 9.5. Even though it did look slightly less cool, this sword was going to be so much more of a beast. Anyways, now that I had all of the armor and tools crafted, for the next 2 days straight, I ran around like a chicken with his head cut off, doing some more beautiful capitalism with all of my villagers for all of the enchantments I was going to need for my armor. During this process, I also sorted them all out inside of a chest, so I knew exactly where each and every enchantment was going to go, because I wanted these to be perfect, which meant the long names must be first and the short names must be on the bottom. It needs to be longest to shortest per enchantment. Otherwise, my OCD would probably implode. So by the end of day 274, I had mostly sorted out all of the enchantments for my armor, and I began combining the books for only the helmet, and that was insanely expensive. I immediately ran out of XP, but I guess it's okay because now all I had to do was go back to my new XP printing farm that I had built in the previous 100 days. And that is exactly what I did until the end of day 276. I was back in the loop of waiting for mobs to spawn in the farm, banishing said mobs to the Shadow Realm with my God XP sword that I would soon be replacing with the brand new one, and I combined stacks of books into single books for each piece of armor that I then applied them to. And in classic PainDomination fashion, each piece of armor had to have an absolutely cracked name. And as sad as it is to say, I sat here on the computer for about an hour thinking about names for these, so I really hope you liked them. For each of these powerful pieces of armor, I decided to go with avatars of the past from the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender. For the helmet, I named it Kuruk's Clever Dragon Helm. I named the chest piece the Indestructible Armor of Kyoshi. For the leggings, I called them the Scorched Dragon's Treads of Roku. And finally, for the boots, I gave them the name Yang Chen's Swift Dragon's Feet. Those are pretty cool, right? Come on, let me know in the comments down below which tribes these avatars were originally from and what you think about these names. Anyways, now that armor part of my new gear was finished, I went to sleep for the night excited to work on my brand new sword and pickaxe. And boy did this sword give me a run for my money, because on the next day, day 277, I started out gathering the enchantments and adding them together to make one book, and I kid you not, it took me 4 whole days because I needed so much XP. I spent several hundred levels in between the mob grinding at my XP farm to get the books all together alone. And then it was going to cost 324 levels to finish the freaking sword. This thing better be worth it. So in order to speed up this process, I bought another Knowledge of the Ages 4 book, and I added it to my Fusion Flare sword, so I could now clean out the XP farm way faster with the extra damage and sweeping edge damage that I did. And within no time, I found myself hitting level 350, and I was ready to craft this new beast of a sword. And of course, I was going to give it a very fitting name of Getsuga Tenshou. Let me know in the comments which anime that's from. It's a pretty obvious classic. Anyways, now that my sword and armor was finished, I went back to my base and equipped the full set of armor to see how I looked. And honestly, at this point, I don't think an army of dragons could defeat me. I was truly ready to go slay more bosses. But before that, I spent the rest of day 281 trying to enchant my new pickaxe, only to realize just how much work that actually was going to end up being. I didn't have any villagers with the right enchantments that I needed for it, nor did I have any of the books. So honestly, this late in the video, it was kind of a lost cause. But being the absolute Giga Chad gamer that I am, I did not give up. I went over to my XP farm for a super quick 100 levels, and I continuously kept re-enchanting and disenchanting this thing with no luck until I finally got something that was kind of okay. I mean, I didn't really have the time to mess with more villagers, so it was as good as it gets. After this, I placed good old Simp Slayer and my old set of armor in this dump chest to say my goodbyes. They have served me well. Sleep well, my boys. For all of day 282, now that my armor and weapons were complete, I spent this day organizing all of the junk out of my shulkers so I had space to stuff all of the future loot that I was about to bring back from this boss-killing rampage. But first, I was going to need more supplies. I first created a dragon arrow shulker that I filled with as many dragon arrows as I could get, along with bones so I could craft more on the fly. After this, I then named 3 more shulkers into supplies, fireworks, and snackies, because I get hungry on the road. I spent the rest of this day attempting to trade for as many rockets and golden carrots as I could from 3 of my villagers, and of course it must have been a holiday weekend because the capitalism just seemed to break down on the spot. However, after enough of the day passed, they finally began refreshing trades, and I had the pleasure of running up and down my non-existent staircase from the dragon incident, you know, to trade with all of my villagers. And honestly, I could move to a new base, but I've been here through so much already that I might as well just keep living here in this burnt down mess. Anyways, by the time this day was over, I was pretty much out of emeralds altogether, and I had accumulated a decent pile of both rockets and golden carrots. It was safe to say I was now ready to go boss hunting. So for the next day, day 283, I set out with my elytra to an old portal that I had made that would lead me to the Everbright dimension, because in here there was another boss that I needed to destroy. After arriving at the small house that was definitely not a victim of my previous arson, I went through the portal, placed down a waypoint so I could find my way back, even though waystones exist, and I began flying looking for a tower where I would find the boss. I flew for a couple of minutes with no luck until I spotted this tiny village that I didn't even know would spawn here, and I landed down in the center where I hit the jackpot. This village was useless, however, it was directly in between this massive jade-looking palace structure that I had zero clue what it was, and on the other side was one of the very towers that I just mentioned that I had came here to fight the boss in. I had only been here for a few minutes, and things were already going down. So I placed down my supply shulker to grab a waystone, and apparently pickaxes break things way slower in this world, which was odd to say the least. Anyways, after naming the waystone, I went to check out the green place, and I saw a second tower behind it. This place had so many more things to explore. So naturally, the first one I wanted to explore was the giant green palace. And this place wanted nothing to do with me. Anytime I set foot around it, I was given indefinite poison, blindness, and slowness. I figured they might want me to enter through the bottom so that way I didn't skip everything on the top. So I looked around the perimeter for a couple of minutes until I found the entrance. And the exact same thing happened. This place was just cursed. Apparently, I did not yet have access to go inside, and I was thinking maybe I needed to defeat the boss inside one of the towers first. So for day 284, I left the Jade Palace for better, more important things. Today, I was going to take down the Summoner. I grabbed my fireworks and I flew up to the tower where I quickly ran through each room and I collected all 4 keys very easily. This place was identical to the Illusioner's boss tower. So after getting all 4 of those keys, I went up to the main floor, right-clicked the lock in the middle, and just like that, I had already entered the boss's room. And honestly, this guy was more of a chump than the last one. All he did was summon these stupid golems nonstop that gave me free blocks each time I killed them. And occasionally, he Kamehameha'd me. That's pretty much it. Overall, this fight went by ridiculously quick. I took 0 damage the entire time, and even with my weapon doing less damage in this dimension, I easily wiped the floor with his face until I was victorious, and he had dropped me the 2nd trophy for my collection, along with this common loot sack that was pretty much just garbage. But hey, another boss had been checked off my list, and I was done with this tower. However, I wasn't finished with this world. After defeating the first boss, I quickly went on to the next, where I collected all 4 of the keys, and I once again entered the boss room. And this time, I was wasting even less time than before. I focused entirely on this boss while paying little to no attention to the golems, and just like that, I had defeated a 2nd summoner. I defeated the summoner 2 times by the end of day 285. I was now unstoppable. For day 286, now that I had taken down the boss for this world, I figured I could finally go inside of the Emerald Palace place from before. So I flew my way back over there, and at last the curse had been lifted. And guess what? This place was absolutely worthless. The only enemies that spawned here were more of those golems, each room was basically the same as the others, and all of the loot chests were pure garbage. So after wasting my time exploring the bottom area, I went outside and flew over to the upper floor, except I still couldn't break any blocks to get inside. I spent a couple of minutes back looking around downstairs from the maze to see if there's any way to get up. However, I was having 0 luck. So I tried one last attempt to get inside before I stopped caring. Every time you try to break the blocks upstairs next to the glass panes, they disappear and it creates a gap in the glass that I thought maybe I could throw an ender pearl through. However, this didn't work, and honestly, I was kind of done with this dimension. There wasn't much else to offer, and the loot was pretty bad, so I was kind of done. I had hunted down the boss that I came here for, and I was ready to move on to the next big thing. So now that I was finished with the Everbright dimension, on the next day, day 287, I stopped back at my house before moving on to hunt more bosses, and I placed down my 2 brand new summoner trophies next to the alchemist one. At the end of 200 days, I said this trophy would no longer be alone, and finally, it has friends. Anyways, today's goal and the next set of bosses I would like to add to my hit list is that of the Twilight Forest mod, which if you played Minecraft for a long time, you'd probably know it's a pretty classic mod pack that has been around since the modding scene basically first existed. So I grabbed myself a water bucket and I fast traveled back to Paintopia so I could attempt to build this new portal. I had made a 2x2 pool of water in the grass and I'd surrounded it with flowers just like the wiki had said. And big reveal, nothing. Nothing happened. I spent most of my day trying to figure out why it wasn't working until I gave up and I went home where I had a genius idea to finally add mending to my only piece of gear that didn't have it, my shield. And after that, I spent the rest of the night slashing away at some XP farm mobs, just mending up all of my gear like brand new, so when I did figure out how to get inside that dimension, I was ready to take on bosses. On day 288, with my armor now repaired, I continued attempting to build the Twilight Portal. I brought some grass blocks back to my base in an attempt to make it there with, once again, 0 luck. At this point, I felt like something was wrong. So I was back to YouTube and Wiki, where I found out you needed to throw a diamond in the water to activate the portal. So I grabbed myself half a stack and I began chucking them in with still no luck. So at this point, I was thinking maybe it was the flowers. Maybe I needed flowers from Minecraft instead of different mods. So once again, I hopped back through the portal to Paintopia, except this time looking for flowers with the Minecraft tag instead of different mods. And finally, after ignoring this massive graphical error in the background, I yeeted DOS Diamond into the water and the portal had formed. And as sad as it is saying this, the portal took me literally 2 entire days to make. Almost an hour of real life time to build a portal. So on the next day, day 289, I prepped my inventory, headed back to the portal, and I jumped in. And honestly, this was my first time ever using this mod pack and being inside of this dimension, and there were so many things to explore. I first started out by checking out the small little shack near the portal with a skeleton druid spawner inside. I broke the spawner, and I viciously struck down the only skeleton that had managed to spawn in. This shack didn't seem to have much loot, so after that I flew off into the distance towards the next item of interest. I found this massive stone maze looking structure with an obvious boss spawner in the center, and after landing, Naga had spawned. And it was safe to say that I was now way too powerful for this mod pack. I had slain this wimpy boss with only a few swipes, and he did 0 damage to me. In fact, he did so little damage that he did negative damage. But anyways, after defeating him, I checked my inventory for my prize, and I had gotten a Naga trophy and 7 Naga scales. So after defeating Naga, I explored the maze for a little bit without really finding that much loot, and I just kind of left. And this is where my real adventure would start to begin. I continued flying until I saw this really odd looking cloud in the sky, and upon landing on it, I faced my worst enemy. It was me. This island was full of giant me's, and they took no damage whatsoever, which is ironic because that's just like me. I tried looking around to see if there's anything I could do up here, and they wouldn't really leave me alone, and they almost crashed my game. A typical Giga Chad me move, of course. So I once again just kind of left. For the next 2 days, days 290 through 291, after leaving that cursed me island, I was exposed to more and more weird things inside of this dimension. I first flew into this cloud of apparent acid rain that made seeing with my eyes not that viable, and while half blind, I discovered this insane giant castle with a force field in the center. And apparently this was the final boss, or at least that's what the text inside of the spawner had said. I looked around to see if there's any clues with what to do next, and I'm assuming I was gonna have to hunt more bosses. Maybe this would be the final boss I could kill before the end of this journey. Either way, none of the things that were roaming around here took any damage, so like the man of culture that I am, I fled quicker than that shiny Pokemon you've been hunting for ages now. And immediately after leaving this place, I had found something new and interesting to explore. After only flying for about a minute, I had discovered this tower with purple roofs on top that I was hoping would be full of things to fight and loot to be found. And you could say I was half right, because there were spawners everywhere. I mean, none of the enemies in here were that strong, and none of the loot here was that great, but the architecture of this place was exquisite. I continued exploring each small room while lighting up the place and banishing all of those weebs to the Doom dimension, and soon enough I found myself at the top of the spiral staircase that was surrounded by paintings, including some pretty cool Pokemon starter ones. And once I set foot on the top floor, I was greeted by yet another Twilight boss, the Lich King himself. And I'm not gonna lie, this fight was even easier than the Ender Dragon in vanilla Minecraft. All I had to do was knock back his attacks a couple of times, and after only 5 of those, I was free to swing at him, and I 2-shot him. I hit this guy twice, and he fell to the floor, cowering in fear. Another boss was dead with minimal effort. But hey, I now had the Lich trophy added to my collection of slain bosses. On day 292, now that the tower was complete and my inventory was full, I began the day by placing out my shulkers and organizing the different items into each of them. At this point, it was still dark and raining outside, but I was not about to let that stop my quest before day 300. So I donned my elytra and once again took off in search of more things to cease from existing. And my first target was yet another Naga boss. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this guy was down and I had gotten another trophy and 10 more hopefully useful scales. After this, I moved on until I found this super close Lich King tower, and this time I immediately skipped everything by just landing on the roof and jumping straight in, where I devastated this guy's KD ratio to the point where he rage quit living. After leaving that dump, I had borrowed his trophy and 2 more zombie scepters. So with another Lich boss down, and I began marking different structures that I saw as possible boss locations. And after that, I headed over to this nearby green mountain, and once digging inside, I was greeted with this awful mess of a cave system of so many interesting mobs, mob spawners, and once again, basically no loot. I ran around in here killing everything with 1 shot, while still taking no damage as my inventory was filled to the brim with useless garbage. At this point, I was really thinking about how overpowered I really was. I'm pretty sure nothing in here could touch me, unless I was being killed with boredom. Kind of like what this cave was doing to me. Non-stop weak enemies with no drops were not that entertaining, so after getting tired of it, I dug my way up to the surface, and I left in the direction of the next possible boss area. For day 293, I started off by landing in the next area, and I was thinking it could be a boss. except instead I was met by this cheap, tiny little maze with easy to kill spider spawners everywhere that I quickly cheesed by walking on the walls. And the walls did hurt me every half a second, but I was still taking no damage. Anyways, after looting all of these terrible chests, I was going to head towards another structure I'd marked on the map, but instead, I took a detour at this huge ice cave, and then I saw it in the center. A boss spawner. After entering the ice cavern, this spawner immediately birthed this huge yeti into existence that I also immediately clowned on. This dude also only took like 5 swings to knock down. At this point, none of these bosses could even imagine standing up to me. But after beating him, he dropped me an Alpha Yeti trophy and 10 Alpha Yeti fur that I once again had no clue what to do with. But I didn't really care because at this point I was on a roll, so I continued on to the next structure to explore, which ended up being this massive, strange looking shaped tower that I couldn't really figure out where the boss was. I flew up to the top and I tried breaking inside different areas, but I couldn't really find anything. So I went back down to the ground floor and tried one of the entrances instead, but I was interrupted by a surprise guest. I literally ran into the hit Minecraft YouTuber, Skies himself, hanging out with a bunch of his brethren. So as any good friend would do, I placed down a shulker, grabbed my quantum catchers, and I put him and his brothers inside of these boxes. Which, if you think about it, could be much worse. They could have been jars. Anyways, I'm hoping to add him to my pet pile that I've definitely not been neglecting this entire series by keeping them all inside of storage boxes. Will Pain ever set his pets free to live good lives before the 300 days are over? Find out in the next episode of Better Minecraft Z. But for now, I finished off this day by attempting to explore this structure with no luck of finding anything, and instead flying over to another ice den where I fought a second Alpha Yeti, and I somehow received 2 more trophies from him instead of 1, which, you know what? It's free real estate. On day 294, I found myself having way too many options on the map for more bosses to slay. There were structures literally everywhere, and honestly, I didn't have any incentives to keep killing the same bosses, so instead I headed to the second one of those final boss areas in the hopes of being able to actually do something. And pretty much the same thing happened. There was acid rain, I couldn't hurt any of the giant Miis, and this time I somehow flew into the barrier in the center because it glitched and it was made of fences. However, I still couldn't do anything. So once again I left. However, this time I wanted to learn what else I had left to do in order to take on that boss. So after a quick search on the wiki where I learned about the boss progression, apparently there are specific bosses you must kill in order, and you otherwise can't access certain areas with more bosses unless you do. Just like in that area I was just in. I had already killed Naga, the Lich King, and the Yeti, and the next on my list was either going to be the Twilight Swamp area or the Hydra. Honestly, I don't really know because at this point the wiki was kind of confusing. However, I now found myself on a time crunch because apparently there were still 5 more bosses. Maybe. Again, the wiki was super confusing, so I'm not really sure. Either way, I now knew what I had to do, and I was in search for the new biomes to explore. After not too much flying, I had found this dark green spot on the map that turned out to be the Twilight Swamp that I was looking for. And inside this swamp was a strange mound of dirt with a huge hole in the middle that led me down into this maze full of minotaurs, and that's when I realized I was in the lair of the next boss. The Minnow Shroom. Kind of a lame name. And now that you think about it, the wiki was starting to make more sense. I had to head to each of these biomes in order to take on each of the bosses before I could defeat the final boss, which I had already found. So for day 295, I spent most of my time down inside of this maze, and things were getting interesting. Lots of mobs and quick poison spiders, there were new cave slimes, and lots of TNT traps that exposed the bedrock layers in between each floor that had stopped me from cheesing this place, which I honestly couldn't be too upset about. I finally was getting a little bit of challenge. I kept exploring around this place, desperately trying to find my way down to the next floor until I found this room with a Minotaur in it. I broke in and 2-shot him, and it turned out he was the boss. Just like that, I had defeated the Minnow Shroom. I had thought there was going to be more challenge here, but you know what? I had gotten his head as a trophy and the diamond axe, and I was now finished here. And let me tell you, getting out of this place was not fun. It took a solid 5 minutes just to find the main drop-down area that I could fly up and out of. And after that, I followed my main path of torches until I was finally free. Free to take on the next boss, the Hydra. which conveniently spawned in the fire swamp that was right next door. However, there was a problem because the very second I entered the biome, I was struck with infinite burning. After approaching the boss, I ended up doing 0 damage, which, after another quick check of the wiki, ended up being because I didn't eat the beef stroganoff that had dropped from the last boss. So after flying back to the swamp, I grabbed one of them from my shulker and I ate it, giving me the achievement that granted me access to the fiery swamp. Honestly, this dimension is kind of whack. However, I was not wasting any time. I immediately flew back to the Hydra's lair to begin the fight. And after all of these easy bosses, this one finally put up a decent fight. Even with my God Mode Bankai sword, it took me a ton of hits to kill him. And he didn't really do anything impressive, but he did manage at one point to get me down an entire bar of health, which was way more than any other boss had gotten anywhere near to combined. Honestly, at this point, I was excited for the next boss to come. On day 296, I continued to pass the fiery swamp in search for the next boss biome, the Dark Forest, in search of a Goblin Knight stronghold where the next boss, the Night Phantom, lies. Except the only problem was, I could not find this place. I spent half of the day flying around in search of this biome with no luck. So I stopped by another one of those massive towers in the Glacier biome instead, because while reading the wiki, I had learned there was apparently a boss here named the Snow Queen. So I went inside, and this time there was actually a way that I could continue to explore in. I began making my way up the tower while deleting any enemies I could find until I stumbled upon this crazy chest with a glass sword that apparently did 40 base damage, which was almost double the damage of my insanely OP dragon sword. What even was this monster of an easy sword to obtain? This tower was so easy, and the sword is so broken. Anyways, you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. After looting this room, I didn't really know where else to go, so I flew outside and I began breaking my way into random parts of the structure until the Snow Queen's name appeared. I broke inside and I immediately began our epic battle, if you can call it that. I killed one wave of her enemies, she landed, I hit her with the old razzle dazzle, and after she regained immunity, my fire damage finished the job. And just like that, I had gotten both the Seeker Bow and the Snow Queen trophy, and I had defeated another easy boss. Honestly, I couldn't even be upset at this point. I was just so powerful that I had literally become Saitama from One Punch Man. I was desperate for a fight that could actually hurt me. For the beginning of day 297, I quickly checked the wiki before organizing all of my inventory back into my shulkers and checking on my trophy collection so far. And supposedly, now that I had beaten the Snow Queen, I now needed to hunt down the Urgast, who was also in the Dark Forest biome, so I could finally access the biome where the acid rain kept hurting me. This dimension mod was really starting to feel like one of those quests in RPG games that just keeps going and going and going. And at this rate, I would be lucky to finish off the final boss before day 300 ends, which means so much for finally naming all of my pets, I guess. Anyways, after reading all of that, I set off from the Glacier biome where I saw this extra dark looking area on the map that had to be the Dark Forest. And after flying over, it finally was. I had finally found the location of my next 2 boss fights, which I think actually ended up being the last 2 ones I was going to need before fighting the final boss. So I flew in under all the trees, and this place was crazy dark, which, I mean, based on the name, kind of makes sense, but you know what, whatever. I didn't really see any signs of structures to fight, but I did notice a ton of pillagers on the map near this messed up looking cave system. So I began exploring deeper until I hit this huge open area with bedrock and blocks that I couldn't yet break. I continued shifting my way through the blindness until I found this square room of lava that I managed to get into, which led directly into what I assume is the castle that I was looking for. After building up from the lava room, I headed up the staircase where I ran to my first goblin enemy, and I could not hurt him, which only meant one thing: I was not ready to be here yet. So after more searching on the wiki, it turns out that I had to find a shrine area where I could place one of my trophies to gain access to this dungeon. So after tons of searching with a night vision potion underground with no luck, I ended up leaving in search above ground. And finally, on the next day, day 298, I had found the above ground entrance with a spot that felt like the right place to be. I placed my 3rd Yeti trophy on the pillar, and the door opened to this entire dungeon. And let me tell you, this place was awful. It took the entirety of this day exploring this awful maze, and once my night vision potion ran out, I was stuck using torches, finding my way, until finally 3 floors down, not to be confused with the band 3 doors down, I ran into the boss room. And this was probably the easiest boss yet, after dying to only a few swipes, which I think I say for every boss at this point. Either way, he dropped a chest in the middle with both his trophy and some useless pieces of armor that don't disappear if you die. But joke was on him because I don't die, ever. Anyways, after this fight was over, I dug my way to the surface only to be greeted by some new massive tower behind the forest. I flew up to it and at the very top spawned the ungassed, the very last boss I needed to defeat the final boss and beat the Twilight Forest. Except this fight was very different than the rest, because this man would not let me get close enough to smack him in the face with my sword, so I was forced throughout this fight to use my bow, which in comparison basically was like Gohan from Dragon Ball Z after the Cell Saga. Anyways, after hitting enough shots and finally defeating this guy, I couldn't really find his drops, and I was terrified that they fell down into the fire and they burned. However, it turned out that there was a chest that had spawned in the very middle top area with the trophy and the other drops that I had needed. And now I should be prepared to go back to the final boss to take him down. So on day 299, now that all the bosses were down, I headed over to the closest final boss castle where I could begin my reign of terror. I flew up to the Cloud Island full of giant Miis, which is still a super, surreal experience, by the way, and I began banishing them each to the Doom Dimension, and they dropped giant swords and giant pickaxes. And now that I had the giant pickaxe, all I had to do was go underground in the same biome to find a troll cave where I could use the pickaxe to break an obsidian box that had the final item inside to get me to the stupid end portal area, whatever. Honestly, long story short, I did that because this dimension was starting to feel like homework. Anyways, now that I had the final step in the Twilight Forest complete, I began digging myself up and out of this dark and stinky troll cave until I finally saw the light. After getting to the surface, I flew up and over to the boss castle, and I was finally able to enter without constantly being blinded and barely hurt by acid rain. I landed in the center boss area, and nothing still happened. The barrier at the center of the castle was still glitched out and broken, and the spawner said, "You win." I was now able to walk inside and out freely, technically, and I could finally kill these monsters called Harbinger Cubes that were just kind of roaming around. I wandered around for a little bit until I got the idea to go back to the wiki, and after much reading, it sounded like there actually wasn't a final boss implemented yet. Had I killed all of these bosses for nothing? With this on my mind, I donned my elytra and I flew all the way back to the last castle that I had seen prior, and upon landing at the center tower, I was met with the same exact thing. And then it kind of just clicked. Above the spawner, it literally said, "Final boss here." The mod wasn't finished, and there was no final boss. After learning of this, I just kind of stood on the edge of the castle, contemplating everything that I had been through. Sure, there was no final boss to add to the collection, but overall, it's about the journey and not the destination. If you focus on the destination, are you truly even living? In this series, I had become incredibly powerful, and I defeated bosses in the triple digits, including dragons. So if you ask me, was it worth it? I would say yes. So being done with this dimension, I placed out a waypoint and I teleported back home for the final day celebration. On day 300, after returning home, I quickly wiped my inventory and I collected the boss trophies from my shulkers to begin putting them on display. But not before first showing this rude AF mutant skeleton who was boss by smacking him with that one punch energy. After he was gone, I placed out each trophy one by one on the banister next to my original trophies, and these things were looking sick. I was kind of wishing that I made myself a house or something, especially something that my pet dragon didn't, implode half of. But after all, I did survive pretty much all 300 days while living here, so this place was kind of special at this point. So to celebrate my time spent in this world for an entire 300 days, I gathered all of the animals that I kept saying I wanted as pets throughout the series. I fenced in this nice area downstairs after cleaning up this mess of a failed portal, with my bare hands may I add, because I was too lazy to get a shovel. After making this area, I one by one released all of my animals. I summoned my 3 seals who were just out here chilling. I summoned my 1 emu friend, a bunch of chimpanzees who apparently one of them had a dragon skull from the dragon fight that I kind of captured them near. I released a bunch of the mini coin dragons, and finally my lizard friends from the first 100 and 200 days videos. And now that all my friends were here, I hung out while the sun began to set. Also, I just want to add this in here at the end. The chimpanzees apparently wanted nothing to do with this party, and they began climbing up the walls, immediately trying to escape. I don't know why I said trying, because they were very successful. I would go and recapture them, but honestly, just let them be free. It was apparently their destiny. And just like that, I had survived for 300 days in hardcore better Minecraft. This series has been so much fun to do, and I am super glad that all of you have enjoyed it as much as I have. Honestly, this is probably going to be the last of Better Minecraft you see for a while on my channel. I beat pretty much everything into the ground, and it's just not as much fun anymore for now. However, don't let that stop you from going and checking out the mod pack yourself, because it has been incredible. There is so much stuff to do in this mod pack. Also, if you haven't already, please go and follow me on Twitter. I'm super active over there, and it's a great place to interact with me and all of the dumb stuff that I tweet. Plus, I'm also thinking about doing some giveaways over there soon in the future, so be sure to go over there and drop a follow. I would love to hit 10,000 followers by the end of this year. Anyways, this has been PainDomination, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.